The views expressed in this review are my own. I encourage everyone to pick up a copy and read it for themselves. What I like, others may not, and vice versa. If you would like to review or critique my own work, I will leave a link in the description. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have a little science fiction, a little fantasy, and a little zealotry. Because today we're reviewing Xenos Eisenhorn, one of the first books in the 40k canon. If you've been on the channel for a while, you'll know I've tried to get into Black Library a while back by starting on the Horus Heresy, and I found it a bit of a mixed bag. It was suggested to me that I start with Eisenhorn by somebody in the comments, so I allowed some time for my opinion to settle on the last book before I decided to get into the next one. So let's get started with the story, what I liked, and what I didn't like, and then my thoughts. Gregor Eisenhorn is a member of the God Emperor's Holy Inquisition. You may be passingly familiar with the old school Inquisitors from Spain. 40k's Inquisitors are similar, except they have far more political power, far better technology, and far less oversight or worry about collateral damage. Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn is pursuing a man named iClone and has tracked him down to a crypto-sleep vault housing about 4 digits worth of a planet's ruling elites. iClone is a known mass murderer and heretic, and Eisenhorn is there to take him down, hopefully before the mass murder part. Well, on the positive side, he does kill iClone. On the negative side, iClone opened all the crypto-sleep caskets before his demise, and all the elites perished slowly and painfully shortly after the criminal. The peasants' despair will have to wait, as the head custodian of the vault needs someone to blame, because he certainly doesn't want to take the blame himself. The person he wants to blame is Eisenhorn. Unfortunate for him, Inquisitors are above such petty things like a few thousand ruling elites dying partially due to his actions. Getting ahead of the head custodian, who's desperately looking for someone else to blame, Eisenhorn follows the clue left by his former target to the habitation blocks, which are kind of like skyscrapers and ghettos all clamored into one. Here he finds some of his former target's lackeys with a prostitute. Eisenhorn introduces one to the business end of the friend he keeps in a holster on his waist, and interrogates the other. He then interrogates the Lady of the Night, only to find out she's a psychic blank. This is a problem for the Inquisitor, as he's an active psyker, and blanks have a, let's call it, profound effect on the psychically gifted. Mainly, they cause disgust and loathing. They also block out psychic powers. Eisenhorn, being a pragmatic man, suppresses his disgust and brings the lady into his service, mainly because blanks are not just incredibly rare, but extremely useful. Eisenhorn is just about ready to take his new information to another world along with his fantastic new prize when the head custodian foists one of his own men on him. Now the Inquisitor is off. Following the trail of clues, his less than gentle questioning acquired him. So let's get into what I liked. First of all, this reads like old sci-fi. I don't mean released in early 2000s sci-fi, as this book was. I mean 1930s to 1950s sci-fi. It's not quite as prim as Starship Troopers, but it does have some of the same tendencies towards diversions for explanations. I will compliment the book, as those diversions are usually short and informative. I may be biased, as I'm a light fan of 40k, not to the point of owning the little plastic men that'll make you take out another mortgage, but I own a few of the games and enjoy the lore. I think it may be a bit harder for someone unfamiliar with the setting, but I'll talk more about that later. The book also handles action fairly well. It's not the best I've seen, but it did keep me engaged. Most of the action is fairly fast with a tight focus. Maybe it's because I still have some trauma from some of the horrible books I read last year, but it's so nice to read a book with good, clean transitions. At no point did I get lost as to where I was, or what was going on, or who was talking. The characters were fairly distinct as well. Granted, I only really cared about 3, that being Eisenhorn, Bequin, his psychic blank former prostitute because she was fun and a little bit funny, and the autistic man that Eisenhorn keeps around because he gathers information like other people breathe air. That being said, there are a few things I want to touch on with the characters later. I do want to touch on Eisenhorn himself. I like him because he feels like a cop in his prime. In a lot of ways, this feels like a detective novel. Eisenhorn is an investigator of sorts. Instead of tracking down crime, he's tracking down heresy. He tries to establish motives and connections, and he's very professional. He understands and sympathizes with the people who see his methods as cruel. He also understands why his actions, cruel though they may be, are necessary. Lastly, in my likes, I want to talk about the lore. 40K is an intellectual property I've always found a bit silly. Not in a bad way, but in an absurdist way. Everything is so much bigger in 40K. The casualties are so much higher. The weapons can scale to nightmarish and absurd proportions. And the setting is bleak and foreboding. That last one comes standard with all grimdark. This book does a good job of bringing the lore to life. It helps us understand why people like Eisenhorn are so important to the survival of the Imperium. What they're fighting is chaos. Not the abstract concept, but an actual living force. It's something so monstrous and corrupting that certain knowledge of it can ruin you. It feels like what Lovecraft was always beating around the bush about. There's a part of the book where Eisenhorn just touches a book that's an artifact of chaos, and its seductive power just overwhelms him. Before he knows it, he's picked it up and almost opened it. If not for a lucky and immediate head wound, he would have been lost to it. It's like a drug that addicts you by simply touching it. Something that can enslave you in 100 ways, both immediate and gradual. It makes for a great and nebulous enemy. Will it get ruined in later books by over-explaining? Possibly. But at this point, it feels dark, mysterious, and threatening. You can understand how people fall to it, as much as you know why they shouldn't. So let's get into my dislikes. Firstly, the story feels slightly overlong. It has a good wrap-up, but sometimes it feels like a class that just doesn't end. Eisenhorn tracks down a lead, fights ensue, they capture some people, others get away, so we repeat the whole thing over again with him hunting down the people who escaped. The story feels like it has multiple climaxes. In this book's case, it kind of works. What they face in the end is certainly worth the slog. It's a minor slog, but it's still a slog. This next thing may just be me, but Eisenhorn feels a bit too good. I wouldn't call him a Mary Sue or a Gary Stu. He's hurt and challenged far too much for that, and is constantly having to be rescued. But everyone around him just dies, with a few exceptions. I can't say it ever really felt like Eisenhorn was in real danger. Granted, he does frequently and brutally get the crap beaten out of him, but something about his trials just didn't land with me. That's not to say he's not a fun character, but it's like the action movies from the 80s and 90s. You know the main character isn't going to die. You know the bad guys are going to lose. Maybe I'm just a bit jaded from reading so many books, and it's possible future installments will change my mind. So let's talk about immersion. While I did like the book, I think it may be a bit too dense for the uninitiated. 40K is a deep, deep universe, with some contradictions due to the numerous writers. Black Library, the publisher of all Warhammer-related books, has over 200 titles, so you can't really get away from that problem. Even for me, there was a little bit too much of an unfamiliarity. I did enjoy the book, and will probably enjoy future books, but it felt like there was a bit too much explanation at times, and a little too much to explain. Something that kept me from being entirely immersed in the story. So let's get into my thoughts. Immediately contradicting myself, I would agree this is probably the gentlest introduction into the universe. The main character is human. He has human emotions, he's relatable, his situation is understandable. Once you get past the required explanations, there's a fun, fast-paced story here. It usually takes some coaxing to get me to read game tie-in novels. I've only done it for this and Magic the Gathering. So far, 40K has been far better. Though I have to say, Artifacts and The Brothers' War are far better introductions to a canon. However, the other books I've read in the Magic the Gathering book series have ruined some of that goodwill. It's possible the same thing may happen for 40k. All that said, I would recommend this book more than Horus Rising, the other 40k book I've read. The characters are far more relatable, and this feels like something you would read to enjoy, whereas Horus Rising feels more like something you'd read to understand the lore. One is entertainment, the other feels supplemental. Good luck, everyone.